I take refuge in the Buddha. I take refuge in the Dharma. I take refuge in the Sangha. Today is Sunday, October 13th, 2024. This is the third full day of the Ancient Way Sesshin and the fourth talk. It's nice to see all of you from this point of view.
Talk louder.
I'll do it. It's nice to see all you from this point of view and to see some new faces coming in for Sunday program and people coming in online. There is a joy in Sangha, and I am appreciating the feeling of support from all of you as I sit up here. We come together for Sesshin. It's this ancient ritual that we're participating in. It's a tool, a help to help us experience this life. We come together to see what this life is for ourselves. Is there freedom from suffering? Can there be joy? What is community like? What does it mean to function freely in this world, wisely and for the benefit of others? Hogan gave us some advice on the first night of this retreat. He said to bring our intention to the forefront. Our intention for Ango for some of us, for Sesshin, for this day, for listening to the Dharma talk, for this breath, to bring that intention forward and to know what our practice is, to meet our practice with some effort to keep coming back to it, and yet with relaxation. Effort and relaxation. There's a balance there. Where is it? What's the least amount of effort to expend to keep coming back so lightly to our practice and stay relaxed? And to bring awareness, to infuse this alert awareness in our practice, to be aware and alert as we sit in this aliveness before thinking, aliveness before thought, the wonder and intimacy of residing in this body before thought, the courageousness and curiosity to rest there. And we've been chanting the Genjo Koan. Each day at noon we are chanting this poem, and I would encourage all of you who are here today outside of Sesshin to chant that at home with us as we chant it this week. The text is available on the website in the Chant Book. We're using it as a touchstone for our practice this week. Chanting is an embodiment practice. And the first step in concentrating and in deepening meditation is to embody. I had a physiology teacher who said, "You're just a tube." We're just a tube. Nutrition comes in, waste comes out. That's all we are, a tube. With vocal cords. Air comes in, air comes out, it rubs up on these cords and sound happens. So in one way, chanting is just being a tube. It's that simple. We feel the flow of air coming in. We feel the vibration in the body. We hear the sound. How can there be right or wrong? There's no too loud or too soft. There's no right or wrong. Not enough air, word mispronounced. We're just a tube vibrating, moving, just sound. In the Genjo Koan, Dogen says, hearing sounds with the whole body and mind. That's all we're doing, just being sound, hearing sound with his whole body and mind. And we're part of a group when we're chanting as well. We're a Sangha body. What does it mean to be part of something larger than ourself or our idea of ourself? Does the experience of being part of a larger body, of being part of this Sangha body, chanting, does that challenge the fixed belief that we start and stop right here? Does it challenge the fixed belief that we are discrete, contained individual? Might the experience of chanting challenge that belief? Is it either or? I'm an individual. I'm a Sangha body. Can it be both? In chanting, we have the experience, the physical, visceral experience of being larger, of being a whole, part of this whole. Sometimes in harmony, sometimes not, sometimes lagging behind, sometimes racing ahead. Lots of room here for the inner critic to come in, isn't there? And lots of room to wholeheartedly experience, to rest before thought as the body moves, as the body makes sound. Dogen says, when you find your place where you are, practice occurs. When you find your way at this moment, practice occurs. When you find your place where you are, practice occurs. It's odd and it's precious and it's so ordinary. Just a tube. Just this practice, bringing the mind back to the body chanting, bringing the mind back to the body breathing, to sound, non-judgmentally, so simple. This week I've been appreciating how learning happens during chanting. We forget a word, drop out of the chant, mispronounce some of the Chinese ancestors' names perhaps, and then hear the correct pronunciation ringing out, being held by this group until the words become part of us, until they just flow out so easily. Organically, very slowly, we come into accord. This is how it is to be human. We're surrounded, we're held by others, and we come into accord. It's an extraordinary experience to be part of something larger, to be something larger, to be lovingly and patiently held, and to feel the joy of movement, of the body, of breath, the simplicity of it. And we're chanting these words which are beautiful and profound, and sometimes just fun to say. What a wonderful way to learn. What a wonderful way to teach. Consider how we learn our native language. We're immersed in it as children. There's so much repetition over and over again until it's imbued in us. And we have these kind and patient adults to gently correct us and be entertained and amused by our mistakes, and to feed us the next little piece of information. We have this mind that is inherently creative, that wants to see patterns, that makes connections, that finds meaning. And with chanting, we are creating this optimal environment for learning and growth and experience. We're oxygenating the brain with this rhythmic breathing. It's a primary brain food ready to make connections and for creative ideas to emerge. We're seeding the mind with these meaningful and beautiful and intriguing words. In this supportive environment that is beautiful, the sound is lovely. We're loading this computer, planting the seeds deeply into the soil, and in time, in its own time, sometimes insights arise. Everyone has had this experience. Oh, that's what that means. From out of nowhere, seemingly, something new bubbles up. Oh, I see. This is wisdom emerging from that space of not knowing. Wisdom arising from that intimate connection with the space before thought. Wisdom arising from just being with this moment. Dogen says in the Genjo Koan, when you see forms or hear sounds fully engaging body and mind, you intuit Dharma intimately. We're doing this. When you see forms or hear sounds fully engaging body and mind, you intuit Dharma intimately. Just ordinary and astounding. Dogen was born in the year 1200. That's about 800 years ago. His mother died when he was young. He was about 7 when she died. At 13, he went to live with an uncle, his mother's brother, who was a monk, with the intention of becoming a monk himself. At this time, when he was 13, he became possessed by a question of his heart. If humans are endowed with Dharma nature, with Buddha nature, this innate potential for all sentient beings to become a Buddha, why did the Buddhas of all ages find it necessary to seek enlightenment and engage in spiritual practice? If we are endowed with Buddha nature, why do we need to practice? Why is it so hard? This was his question. This was his heart's longing to understand. He burned with this question. He sought answers, first where he was living, and then he traveled around to other temples, asking abbots, asking others the same question. If we're endowed with Buddha nature, why do we practice? One teacher suggested that in order to find the answers to his question, he might travel to China. And so in 1223, at the age of 23 years old, over 10 years after he had this question in his mind, he's still pondering it. Why? What? He traveled to China and studied. He stayed there for 4 years looking for answers. We can do this too. We seed our mind with these questions. We continue practice. We rest in this intimacy before thought with this question, this not knowing, and we continue on. A decade, longer. Dogen spent 4 years traveling, studying, and practicing in China. He ended with a teacher that he loved. He referred to him as the old Buddha. And it was with this teacher that he had an enlightenment experience after hearing the teacher say, "Cast off body and mind." We can hear the echo of the importance of these words to Dogen in the Genjo Koan. He writes, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things in the universe. To be enlightened by all things in the universe is to cast off the body and mind of the self, as well as those of others. Even the traces of enlightenment are wiped out, and life without traceless enlightenment goes on forever and ever." When he was still young, 27 or 28, he returned to Japan. He had held this question of why do we need to practice if we are already inherently Buddha, if we have this Buddha nature for over 15 years. This pondering, searching, and practicing with this question. Informing who he was and how he approached life. It informed his life and his teaching. Wholehearted practice is not separate from realization. Wholehearted practice is not separate from realization. He shares this in his work, the Genjo Koan. This knowing and total penetration of the Buddha Dharma arise together and are practiced together. This insight came from his question. He goes on to say, here is the place where the way unfolds. The boundary of realization is not distinct, for the realization comes forth simultaneously with the full experience of Buddha Dharma, not separate. Practice is not separate from realization, from enlightenment. In the last section of the Genjo Koan, Dogen poetically shares the answer to his life's question with us. Priest Paoche Makushan was fanning himself. A monk appeared and asked, "The nature of wind is eternal, and there is no place it does not reach." We're all endowed with Buddha nature. Why then must you still fan yourself? Why do we need to practice? Although you understand the nature of wind is eternal, you do not understand there is no place it does not reach. You do not understand the nature of practice enlightenment. How does it reach everywhere? The master just fanned themselves. Those who say we should not use a fan because the wind is eternal, and so we should know the nature of wind without using a fan, know neither the external nor the nature of wind. Dogen held this question for over a decade, pondering and seeking, asking teachers, sitting with it intimately, not knowing, and ultimately understanding and wisdom arose in response to the question. This is how the body-mind works. This is available to us as well. What is your question? What is your heart's question? This question fuels our intention. What is the question beneath your intention? At the evening service, we've been chanting the Song of Zazen. This was written by another of our Zen ancestors, Dogen Zenji. He lived in Japan over 400 years after Dogen. As a child, he attended a lecture with his mother, which was given by a local monk, on the 8 hot hells. He was deeply impressed by this lecture. It scared the bejeebers out of him. So much so that he, at this age, developed this pressing fear of going to hell. And he began to seek any way to avoid it. He created rituals at home, which he assiduously practiced. This became Hakuin's question. How can I avoid going to hell? This stuck with him. He was so motivated by this question that at the age of 15, he convinced his parents to allow him to join a monastery. He felt that if he became a monk, he would be safe from the fires of hell. This was like a primary motivator still. And then, at 19, in his studies, he came across the story of a Chinese master who had been brutally murdered by bandits. This sent him into total despair. He thought, if a great monk could be murdered, could die a bloody death in this life. How could such a simple monk like me be saved from the fires of hell after this life, the torture in the next life? And he was so shaken by this that he left the monastery. He spent the next years studying literature and poetry. But eventually he came back to monastic life and became a very influential person in our lineage. He had great realizations and became, quite a character for us to model ourselves after. And his path to practice and the realizations that he had began with this question, this heart's question. It fueled his intention and informed his practice throughout his entire life. Like Dogen, he held this question in not knowing and came back to it over and over and over again, seeding this body, mind. What is it? How can this be? This mind that is creative and seeks meaning. There's a tradition in Zen of composing a death poem. Hakuin composed a death poem, and his poem captures both the compassion, the great compassion he felt for everyone, for us, but it also so poignantly illustrates both his deep understanding of this life and this practice, but also the impact that this question, how can I avoid burning in hell, this question that he carried, it shows the impact it had on his life. So here's his death poem. "Oh, young folks, if you fear death, die now. Having died once, you won't die again." Before the Buddha became a Buddha, he had a question. This question of the heart. Why do I suffer? Why do we suffer? Why do people suffer? Dogen had a question. What if we are all endowed with Buddha nature? Why then do we need to practice? Hakuin had a question of the heart. How can I avoid the fires of hell when I die? These questions held and pondered, sat with, profoundly informed and influenced their lives, the course of their lives. I'm reminded of another chant that we chant here, the practice of the treasury of luminosity. In it, Koan Zenji says, even if 84,000 thoughts come and go, each will display itself as the luminosity of perfect knowing. What is the question that you hold? What brought you to practice? What is beneath your intention? The inner critic wants to jump in, wants to evaluate. The Buddha asked why people suffer. Well, that was a pretty good question. But why did Dogen care so much about needing to practice? Was he trying to get out of doing his work? And what about Hakuin? Should practice be motivated by aversion, what you don't want? And what about my question? Is it good enough? Is it selfish? Is it too narrow? Is it not profound enough? Even if 84,000 thoughts come and go, each will display itself as the luminosity of perfect knowing itself if you do not hold on to them and allow them to just go on their way. Our question is our question. It's ours. We begin where we begin. Dogen says, when you find your place where you are, practice occurs. In Genjo Koan, Dogen says, enlightenment is like the moon reflected in the water. The moon does not get wet, nor is the water broken. Although its light is wide and great, the moon is reflected even in a puddle an inch across. The whole moon and then the entire sky are reflected in dewdrops on the grass, or even in one drop of water, or even in one question. We began this retreat by affirming the importance of intention. Intention for Ango. Intention for this retreat. Intention for this meditation period. For this breath. This very body is the Dharma gate. With curiosity, courage, alert awareness, we engage our practice, become near, intimate, fuse with, become imbued by the breath, sound, this moment. As Dogen says, here is the place. Here the way unfolds.